In America, we love to brag about freedom, but that sometimes extends to the freedom to eat additives other countries won't even allow near their citizens. From hormone-boosted dairy to bread stiffened with chemicals also found in yoga mats, our shelves often read more like a chemistry set than a grocery store. Since 2021, new bans abroad and state-level measures at home have pushed more attention onto these ingredients. Even the FDA started revisiting food chemicals in 2024 and 2025. Today we're breaking down 33 American foods still banned overseas, why they're restricted, and how some companies are changing. And yes, the list starts bright. Mountain Dew banned glow-in-the-dark soda. Mountain Dew built its reputation on looking more like a science experiment than a soft drink. The luminous green bottles, the marketing promises of extreme energy, and the dare-like vibe all played into that image. But the real issue hiding behind the glow was brominated vegetable oil, or BVO, an additive that kept citrus flavors from separating, but carried a history that made regulators uneasy. BVO contains bromine, a chemical element also found in flame retardants. While that alone doesn't make it toxic, studies on brominated compounds have raised concerns about neurological effects and thyroid disruption in animals, leading regulators to question whether long-term exposure was safe for people. Japan banned BVO in the 1970s, and the European Union later did the same, leaving the United States as one of the few markets where it survived well into the 21st century. For years, soda makers used it freely in products like Mountain Dew and certain citrus-flavored Gatorades, but public pressure gradually pushed many companies to move away from it. As of July 2024, the FDA formally revoked authorization for BVO, citing safety concerns and aligning U.S. regulations with the international bans already in place. Still, the change hasn't been instant. Some U.S. shelves continue to carry cans and bottles with the old formula as production phases out, even though the recipe is reformulated abroad. A drink bought in Germany looks the same on the outside, but no longer contains the chemical that American regulators only recently decided to eliminate. Want to know why you can still find the old formulas in some U.S. cans? I'll explain why companies and regulators moved at different speeds. And this isn't the only example of America allowing additives others rejected years ago. The same pattern shows up in another basic staple many of us keep in the fridge every day. Milk with rBST. Hormone boost nobody else wants. Milk became its own controversy when American regulators approved synthetic hormones for dairy cows back in 1993. The hormone, known as rBST or RBGH, is a lab-made version of bovine somatotropin. Farmers inject it to stimulate higher milk yields without adding more cows or feed, which made it appealing as a cost-cutting tool in the 1990s. A USDA survey from 2014, however, showed that only about 10% of farms were still using it, reflecting how public opinion and market forces steadily turned against the practice. The scientific debate has always centered on what rBST does to milk composition. Studies show milk from treated cows can have higher levels of IGF-1, or insulin-like growth factor 1. Some research has suggested a potential link between elevated IGF-1 and increased risks of cancers such as breast, prostate, and colorectal. While not every study has confirmed a direct cause and effect relationship, the possibility was enough for Europe and Canada to reject the hormone outright in the early 1990s. Their regulators concluded that avoiding potential risks was a safer public health bet than accepting cheaper production costs. Here in the US, the FDA has never reversed its approval, but consumer behavior tells a different story. Dairy products carrying rBST-free or from cows not treated with artificial hormones labels have steadily gained traction. Major supermarket chains pushed suppliers to move away from rBST, and today, hormone-free branding is visible across everything from gallon jugs of milk to national fast food cheese sourcing. Many Americans who still encounter it may not even realize that hormone-treated milk and hormone-free milk often sit side by side in the dairy section. And while milk became a battleground over hormones, the same tug-of-war between cost savings and consumer trust shows up in another product Americans grab off store shelves just as often, this time on the sweet side of the aisle: chocolate with PGPR emulsifiers. Chocolate offers another clear example of how American food makers cut costs in ways that raise eyebrows abroad. In the US, candy aisles are dominated by oversized bags sold at bargain prices, while European shelves emphasize richer cocoa content and fewer shortcuts. That contrast helps explain why US manufacturers frequently rely on an emulsifier called PGPR, while overseas markets tend to discourage or limit it. PGPR stands for polyglycerol polyresinolate. In chocolate, it acts as a blending aid, making it possible to use less cocoa butter while still producing a bar that appears smooth and glossy. For companies, it's an easy way to stretch expensive cocoa supplies further. To the casual shopper, the change isn't obvious. The chocolate still melts in your mouth, but critics argue it swaps a natural base ingredient for a processing additive that doesn't need to be there. In the United States, the FDA has approved PGPR for use in chocolate, and it commonly appears in mass-market candy. But health and consumer advocates have long questioned why an unnecessary emulsifier should replace cocoa butter at all. Lawsuits over the past decade highlighted complaints that labels often downplay how little cocoa is actually in some products. The argument is that PGPR itself is inherently toxic. It's that it represents another corner cut to maximize yield instead of flavor. European rules approach the issue differently. While PGPR isn't outright forbidden, regulators set stricter limits on emulsifiers and require clearer labeling, especially on foods marketed to children. In practice, that pushes major chocolate brands to sell higher cocoa versions abroad than they do in American grocery chains, reinforcing a cultural divide between snack food as a treat versus snack food as filler. And that divide is even more striking when you look beyond chocolate at another booming category, where the ingredient in question isn't a space-saving emulsifier, but a massive dose of stimulants. Energy drinks above caffeine limits. In the US, energy drinks have become the quick answer for anyone needing a burst of alertness. Students cramming through the night, workers pulling long shifts, and gamers stretching a marathon session often turn to cans that contain far more caffeine than a standard cup of coffee. Some varieties pack over 300 milligrams in one serving, roughly 3 or 4 strong coffees condensed into a single drink with a flashy label. Medical professionals warn that very high or repeated intake, especially among younger people, can increase the risk of heart problems, sleep disruption, and neurological issues. The concern rises when energy drinks also include extra stimulants like guarana and taurine, which can intensify the overall effect of the caffeine. Research continues to monitor how these combinations impact health over time, but warnings from doctors remain consistent. Moderation is critical. By 2025, several governments had moved to control the trend. Some countries limit caffeine amounts per serving, while others restrict sales to minors. The European Union requires clearer labeling and sets tighter caps that force brands to adjust their formulas overseas. Australia enforces similar limits with added warning labels. Certain Middle Eastern countries have banned sales entirely for anyone under 18. In practice, this means buying an energy drink abroad might involve showing proof of age. While in the US, teenagers can still grab one off the convenience store shelf without question. That divide creates two versions of popular brands. The international cans, reformulated to meet stricter standards, and the American ones, often double the strength and sold with minimal warnings. Later, we'll show a comparison that highlights just how different those cans can be. You might be surprised by which brands quietly scale back overseas. Energy isn't the only place where American products face a double standard, though. The same packaging that hides what's inside a tall can also shows up on familiar childhood snacks, where bright colors carry their own risks. Little Debbie Swiss rolls and colorful additives. For many Americans, Little Debbie Swiss rolls are less about nutrition and more about nostalgia. The shiny foil, the chocolate glaze, and that perfect spiral of cake and cream made them a lunchbox favorite. What most kids never knew, however, is that inside that cheerful wrapper are artificial dyes like Yellow 5 and Red 40, ingredients that fuel an ongoing debate about food safety worldwide. Yellow 5, also called tartrazine, has been criticized for decades. Research has linked it to hyperactivity and behavioral shifts in children, especially those already sensitive to dietary triggers. Red 40 has drawn similar concern, with studies suggesting associations with allergic reactions and neurological effects. The findings haven't been identical across every study, but the pattern was strong enough to prompt action overseas. Norway and Austria banned foods containing these dyes, while the European Union set strict rules. If a product includes certain dyes, the label must warn consumers that they may negatively affect kids' attention and activity. That warning often appears right on the packaging, leaving parents to decide if a colorful treat is worth the risk. By contrast, American shoppers see no similar disclosure. Swiss rolls line shelves as harmless after-school snacks without so much as a cautionary note, but cracks are beginning to show in that approach. In recent years, several U.S. states have introduced bills or regulatory reviews aimed at restricting synthetic dyes or requiring new labels. Advocacy groups continue to argue that parents deserve the same transparency already required in Europe. Want to avoid the additives but keep the snack? In many European markets, Swiss rolls are reformulated or at minimum come stamped with a warning. At home, the only hint is still the bright color itself. And this way of dressing up food with unnecessary chemicals isn't limited to desserts. It's just as common in the morning, especially in one of America's most recognizable breakfast staples. Fruit Loops with BHT flavor enhancers. Walk down any cereal aisle in the US and it's impossible to miss Fruit Loops. The bright reds, greens, and purples practically glow under the lights, promising fruit flavor even though the box doesn't contain actual fruit. Beyond the sugar and artificial dyes, there's another small detail on the label, BHT or butylated hydroxytoluene. It isn't there for taste or color, but as a preservative to keep the cereal from going stale and lengthen its shelf life. BHT has long been controversial. Laboratory research has raised concerns about potential carcinogenic effects in animals, and while findings vary, the possibility has been enough for regulators abroad to act cautiously. BHT and its chemical cousin BHA are restricted in several countries, including Japan and throughout the European Union, for nations that set tighter food safety standards. The simplest solution was to block products relying heavily on these additives or require reformulated recipes. The result is clear on store shelves overseas. A box of Fruit Loops sold in Europe looks identical on the outside, but may use different preservation methods and avoid certain synthetic dyes altogether. In contrast, the American version still carries the line BHT for freshness, and most consumers wouldn't know their breakfast looks different than what families are eating across the Atlantic. The product identity remains the same, but the reliance on chemical preservatives marks a divide between two approaches to food regulation. American buyers rarely see this difference spelled out on packaging. It's simply accepted as part of what's in the box. And while cereals keep their long life on U.S. shelves thanks to chemistry, another morning, favorite manages to stay just as common while, depending on additives that international health organizations have already declared unsafe. Coffee Mate Creamer and artificial fats. For many coffee drinkers, Coffee Mate Creamer is as common on the breakfast table as the mug itself. The bottles line grocery aisles in dozens of flavors, and those single-serve tubs show up in hotels and office kitchens everywhere. What's less obvious is that, for years, many versions of Coffee Mate were built around hydrogenated oils, ingredients that once made them creamier, but also put them in the middle of debates about artificial fats. Hydrogenated oils are the main source of artificial trans fats, which researchers link to higher cholesterol, arterial buildup, and greater risk of heart disease. Unlike some food additives still under study, trans fats came under unusually strong global criticism. In 2015, the US FDA announced a policy to remove partially hydrogenated oils, fuzz, from foods, effectively banning their use after a phase-out period. Even before that, Denmark and a handful of other countries had set strict limits, making them early leaders in eliminating trans fats from processed foods. By 2023, the World Health Organization took an even firmer stance, declaring them unsafe at any level. That doesn't mean every Coffee Mate bottle on shelves today is identical. Over time, Nestlé reformulated many versions to meet the FDA's phase-out rules and international laws. But historically, hydrogenated oils were a signature part of their creamers, which is one reason some countries required reformulated recipes before import. For consumers, the confusing part is that older lots and some specialty products may still reflect the older formulations, depending on where you shop. The main takeaway: checking labels matters more than assuming the brand as a whole has changed. We'll point out specific examples and what to look for on packaging in the end cards. And while creamers highlight America's complicated relationship with artificial fats, some of the same preservative debates show up in another beloved pantry item that's tied closely to major holiday meals: stove-top stuffing with preservatives. For many Americans, stove-top stuffing has been a dependable shortcut for holiday meals. Instead of drying bread and chopping vegetables, you just open a box, add hot water, and end up with a ready-made side that tastes close enough to homemade. Its long shelf life and big batch convenience are exactly what made it a pantry staple for decades. But on the back of the box, the ingredient list points to a detail that other countries have flagged: preservatives like BHA and BHT. These additives, short for butylated hydroxyanisole and butylated hydroxytoluene, act as synthetic antioxidants, keeping fats from spoiling and giving packaged foods a longer life in storage. That means stuffing can sit in the pantry for weeks without losing flavor or texture, which works well for shoppers who stock up ahead of the season. The downside is that studies in animals have raised concerns about their potential carcinogenic effects, and that uncertainty has shaped how different countries regulate them. BHA and BHT have been restricted or banned in several regions, including the European Union, Japan, and parts of the United Kingdom. Internationally, some brands reformulate their recipes with alternatives such as natural oils or vitamin E and feature them with clean label marketing. In contrast, the US still allows the additives, though in 2025 the FDA has placed both on its active review list for possible regulatory changes. Spoiler: many American companies already sell reformulated versions overseas. Sometimes the very same brand you see in US stores has a cleaner ingredient list abroad. Yet in American supermarkets, Stovetop still carries BHA and BHT into dining rooms every Thanksgiving. And preservatives aren't the only additives carving out two versions of the same familiar food. Frozen desserts come with their own hidden ingredient, one that looks harmless at first but has sparked new concern after recent studies: drumstick ice cream and Carrageenan. Nothing captures summer snacking in the US like a drumstick cone, the chocolate-dipped top, the peanuts sprinkled over, and that hidden chunk of chocolate at the bottom of the waffle cone. It feels like a reward pulled straight from the freezer. But alongside the nostalgia sits an ingredient that many regulators overseas treat much more carefully: Carrageenan. Carrageenan comes from red seaweed and has been used for decades as a stabilizer, keeping ice cream creamy and preventing separation during storage. On paper, it looks like a simple plant-based solution. Yet studies over the years have linked Carrageenan to intestinal inflammation in animal research and certain lab experiments on human cells. While not all findings translate directly to human health, the uncertainty around digestive impacts has fueled calls for tighter rules, especially in foods intended for vulnerable groups. That caution is reflected in international regulations. The European Union restricts the use of Carrageenan in infant formula, citing concerns that developing digestive systems may be more at risk. Other countries have also placed limits on how and where Carrageenan can be used in food. By contrast, the US still allows it widely, and consumers will find it not just in drumsticks, but also in yogurt, creamers, and many other dairy-based desserts. So when Americans unwrap a drumstick cone on a hot afternoon, the ingredient list quietly includes Carrageenan, an additive some countries deliberately avoid in certain foods. Later in the video, we'll compare ingredient labels side by side so you'll know what to look for if you want to spot Carrageenan-free options. And Carrageenan is only one example of an additive that shapes how foods are marketed at home versus abroad. In other products, the controversy centers less on stabilizers and more on the very colors that make them look appealing in the first place. Skittles and artificial colors. Taste the rainbow may be one of the most recognizable slogans in American advertising, but the candy behind it relies on additives that have been under international scrutiny for years. Skittles get their bold hues from synthetic dyes like Yellow 5, Yellow 6, and Red 40. In the United States, those dyes remain broadly approved for use in candies, cereals, and drinks. In Europe, however, products containing these colors face tighter oversight. The European Union restricts certain dyes in infant foods and requires warning labels when they appear in snacks for older children. A stark difference from the US, where no such label is required. Medical researchers have questioned how these dyes might affect sensitive populations. Yellow 5 has been associated with allergic reactions, while yellow 6 and red 40 have drawn scrutiny for possible links to hyperactivity and attention issues. These concerns planted the seeds for reform, but in the early 2020s, dyes were no longer the only part of the Skittles recipe making headline. Titanium dioxide, used to make colors appear sharper and more uniform, set off a larger debate. In 2021, the European Food Safety Authority flagged genotoxicity concerns tied to titanium dioxide, citing evidence from rodent studies and cell experiments. By 2022, the European Commission banned titanium dioxide in foods altogether, forcing candy makers to reformulate if they wanted to keep selling across the EU. Some manufacturers moved even faster, removing it from recipes ahead of the mandate. Meanwhile, US regulators held a different line. The FDA continued to classify titanium dioxide as safe in small amounts, but by 2024 had accelerated reviews in response to mounting pressure. At the state level, places like California began weighing their own restrictions. If you want to avoid TO2 at home, checking labels is the only reliable option. We'll show clear examples later. This split leaves American candy aisles stacked with treats that carry additives their overseas counterparts have already eliminated. And it isn't limited to sugary brands with rainbow packaging. It also extends to everyday snacks that market themselves as the sensible choice. Wheat Thins, preserved with BHT. Wheat Thins are often marketed as the responsible choice in the snack aisle, the lighter option compared to cookies or chips. Yet the recipe includes an additive that has drawn scrutiny for years, BHT or butylated hydroxytoluene. This synthetic antioxidant is added to keep the crackers crisp by slowing down oxidation, ensuring they taste the same months after packaging. For manufacturers, it's an efficient way to extend shelf life. For consumers, it means the box in the back of the pantry doesn't go stale. The controversy comes from how different countries approach BHT's long-term effects. Researchers have debated its safety for decades, with animal studies raising questions about whether it could act as a potential carcinogen.